makes it very simple for people to get the payouts that they deserve without hindering and discouraging corporations to engage in important innovation and setting complex and legal standards for questions that probably are otherwise unresolvable. So let's get to that simple contribution. Why does it make it easier for people to get insurance when AI is at fault? The first thing to prove is that when an accident occurs, for example, a self-driving car runs over a pedestrian, you can't obviously blame and fault the AI. The AI is not a legal person, it's a corporate entity owned by a corporation. The second premise of this is that in order to prove that that corporation was at fault, the specific cause that the person has identified is that that corporation was negligent. There are three structural reasons as to why negligence is notoriously difficult to prove, which means that people are unable to get the money that they actually need. I'll go through this, the way I'll explain this is going through the conditions of fulfilling whether someone was in fact negligent and explaining why at each step that's unlikely. First thing that you have to establish in a case of negligence is to explain that the duty of care exists. That's often not the case, right? For example, it's a very well-known ethical dilemma as to whether a self-driving car should prioritize the driver of that car or the driver of the other car, the driver of the pedestrian. Like, it's a famous thought experiment because it hasn't been answered yet, which suggests that it's very, very difficult to prove. The second thing to say is that even if you establish that the duty of care exists, you would of course need to establish that the duty of care is breached. And that occurs in two ways. And crucially, both of these two aspects must be true. No. Firstly, you need to prove that the person was actually had an incentive to breach the duty of care, in the sense that negligence is just not the absence of doing something, it's the incentive and the active disregard not to do something, which is therefore something that's difficult to prove, because corporations could do things like, well, we ran tests for the car, we did our due diligence, we just didn't foresee that consequence in that particular accident happening, and that is enough of a liability shield for corporations to simply not get the payout. But the other thing we have to prove is not just that the duty of care exists and that they were meaning to not breach the duty of care, we would also need to prove that they had the capacity to fulfill that duty of care. And we would note that it's very easy, again, for corporations to say that simply that there are just like an infinite number of ways that things go wrong, unintended consequences can happen, traffic incidents are quite complex. They involve cars, a lot of traffic, a lot of road regulation, traffic light, red light cameras. Maybe it was even the driver himself who was at fault. Maybe it was their behavior that could potentially led to a hazardous situation. And given the very complex causal factors that are at play, it's very, very easy for corporations to obfuscate the specific link between the AI and the very action that ended up happening. That's especially true because corporations, typically, especially those that are developing nascent AI technology, are probably reticent to, for example, disclose the extent to which their algorithms work and things like that, or the reason that those things are patented, or they obviously have no incentive and in fact have no requirement to provide that to a court of law and things like that, because that is corporate proprietary information, which again helps corporations in this battle. So, what is the upshot of this argument? We've proven structurally that it's vanishingly unlikely that people were the victim of accidents, were the victim of our self-driven cars, or the other ways in which AI can go wrong, in fact get their payout. And we guarantee that they get that payout if they don't need to do anything. They weren't at fault, which means that the company will pay out the insurance due. So that is a certain benefit. It's also a benefit to a very, very important set of people that you might believe to be relatively sympathetic. That is the first contribution that opening government provides. The second contribution that opening government provides is taking them at their best. Even if you believe that it's actually possible in many instances to prove that someone was at fault, that's actually not a good thing for a set of reasons. The first to say is that if you believe that proving things that are at fault are easy, the problem is that accidents are very likely to happen, at least in the initial run when a car is being wheeled out. And that's quite harmful, because what that means is that if a company has to pay it out a lot of the time, that opens the floodgates to more insurance claims, which means that discourages innovation in the first place. Crucially, why are the insurance premiums that you would have to pay for no-fault insurance cheaper than the insurance payouts that you have to pay for at-fault insurance? The structural reason for this is that at-fault insurance is inherently more punitive. Like, you are at fault, and therefore it makes sense that if you are proven to be at fault, you would need to pay a lot more, which is why at-fault insurance is inherently more expensive than corporations and no-fault insurance, which is why that degree of money could otherwise be spent on R&D, when in fact it's enough to discourage companies from entering that market altogether. So there is a marginal difference there. The second thing to say is that even if you believe, like, the op-bench would need to structurally prove to you exactly how people are successfully landing their cases of fault. And we think that the standards themselves to adjudicate whether an AI was at fault is quite pernicious in the first place. It's set standards that, once they're set, are very, very difficult to reverse. Why is that harmful? The first thing to say is that consequences are difficult to foresee. So maybe now, in 2024, we might say, well, the AI, driving the car should really prioritize other pedestrians as opposed to the driver themselves. But that moral preference may change. Or in fact, maybe technology itself evolves, which means that the answer to that question radically depends on the parameters and the situation, the level of technology, the level of causal responsibility that we should people have. The problem is that if you set that decision now, you essentially set that decision forever, for the reason that insurance firms would take that as a precedent. If it goes to a court of law, the judges would set that as a precedent. Other cases and other trials are dependent on that initial decision. And that means that precedents, once established, are extraordinarily difficult to dislodge, which raises the bar for op-bench considerably. You would need to believe that they were that see it. Oh, sorry. Yeah, fair enough. All right, cool. So, standards of negligence, even if proven, are in fact in many ways harmful. What is the impacts that we have provided? First, I've noted that we've essentially explained why this system is an easy way of benefiting all parties in this debate. There's no trade-off. People get their money, and the AI company is happy to pay no-fault insurance because it's cheaper than the payouts they would have to pay in the event that they were at fault. There's no trade-off in this debate. We get to have our cake and eat it too. But secondly, I want to specifically explain why it's important for us to encourage AI innovation. Why that's incredibly valuable, even if you believe that is at some cost to some people. That's for the simple reason that in the long run, AI will save lives. Like at its completion in theoretical best, a self-driven car is never going to be drunk, is never going to be tied behind the wheel, is always going to be better than a human driver who might be susceptible to biases and faults. AI chatbots do make the accessibility of mental therapy a lot easier. And if we can, and companies always have an incentive to make sure they are somewhat safe because they don't want to pay a payout in either world, which is why in the long run AI will be better and it's necessary for us to maintain it. For those reasons, we're
I'm not sure who wrote this legal case for cyber government. It might have been Czech, because they have really bad law notes. They didn't get it from a law professor. Their conception of negligence is ridiculous. What I will do in this speech is firstly explain our countermodel. What we will do is, with their fiat, we would counterwise use AI, make AI companies and firms keep lots and lots and lots of records. They must keep the records of how their AI work, when the AI is operable, what the AI says, what the AI has done. Every turn that a car makes must be logged. Every time the acceleration goes up a little bit, it must be logged. I would note, we don't need to use a lot of fiat for this at all. AI companies already have an existing incentive to do this anyway, so we aren't using that much fiat because they know that that information can be used for any other form of research and to also make better AI. The second thing I'm doing in setup is explain what AI looks like. Well, actually, I won't do this. They kind of did it. They were pretty good with setting that up. It looks like mental health chatbots as well, but this isn't super critical for our case, but I think it's awesome to know. But there's like AI where you can walk through a thing and then it tells you what diseases you have. It's like if the lady who made that like bad Edison robot actually worked. It's awesome. It's incredible. All right, first argument we're going to make. The insurance schemes promote risky use and creation of AI. This system reduces the political capital for regulatory frameworks. This looks like the regulatory framework of the records keeping that I described before. It looks like the reduction of regulatory frameworks, like minimum standards of advice. For example, AI that is used for financial advice, what levels of competence it would be using. Also, maybe legal AI, what cases it might be using, and which cases it adopts to maybe inform its decision. Is it using really high-level cases or cases that are very, very meticulous or not? But also, it looks like disclosure regulations, telling people what the limitations of that AI is. These regulations should sound sexy to you, because they are. They're incredibly useful. It keeps people from dying. Telling people this is what the AI could do to you if you were to walk through the scanner, if you have a specific medical condition, could literally blow you up, bro. So it's clearly important that they are consistently regulated. We think that the political capital for this goes down under their side. And the reason is because firms are able to lobby to reduce them and are persuasive in their lobbying to do so. The AI firms and promoters are really wealthy and connected. And I would like the next part of this speech to be redacted for whoever's recording. But I'm going to talk about Elon Musk. That guy is, you know, he's going to become like a department secretary soon, because Trump is like, I'm going to get this dude to make the bureaucracy really, really efficient. These AI people have lots of money. They have lots of political capital. They have immense power in the political system. They are able to reduce the regulation, and they can say it because we're already paying the insurance scheme. What more do you want? There is no political capital to do this regulation to the extent that we will do it. And regulation is critical. Even if they have some regulation, that should not sway the debate. That should still win us this clash, because regulation to the highest extent is important. Why? Because regulation is preventative. It stops. It's better than having post hoc remedies. So, for example, some things can be irreversible. What if an AI executes a futures contract? Maybe some of you don't know what that is. I know what it is. I'm really smart. It executes a futures contract which artificially inflates the price of certain assets that could cause a bubble, and that bubble destroys a lot of economies in communities. And the AI who do this are less regulated than ours. It's less. You can't. They aren't being audited as much as under our side. Another good example is car crashes. If they're less regulated, they could happen more. I feel like that's the highest impact, because if the car crashes, the car gets damaged. Next, they might say, well, if the regulation is so good, it would occur anyway, which is logically fallacious, because the regulation, maybe there's political capital for it or an appetite for it, but the incentives I told you before, the levers of power, are corrupted by certain actors who have overwhelming power compared to the actual population. The next argument I'll forward is that a court case is highly critical. That is to say, irrespective of whether or not they're slower, you must have a court case. And the reason is because court cases provide varied remedies. They don't just provide damages, they provide specific performance. So specific performance is when you force someone to do something. For example, from now on, your AI must do this, this, and that. From now on, the person who sits on your board must have these qualifications. The courts are able to change and amend the way people behave in order to improve the use of that AI. But also, court cases are highly critical to set precedents. Precedents are when courts decide a decision and everyone knows, okay, this is what the court thinks about this, so we're going to have to follow this rule. What does AI intent mean? Also, Brendan asserts AI doesn't have legal personhood. That's not true for all jurisdictions. In Australia, they actually do. That is the reason why if AI makes IP, it can't belong to the person who made the AI. It belongs to the AI itself. So, for that reason, you must have precedents. What constitutes wrong? What is allowed? And the reason why precedents are important and confidence is important is so investors know that they're not investing in a shaky legal system. They know exactly what's going to happen. Precedents are really critical. Take me away.
Yeah, companies have self-regulatory incentives, even with no health insurance. Because if your insurance firm has to pay out a lot of accidents, guess what? Your insurance premium spike.
Yeah, okay. This policy restricts access to goods and services in a deeply pernicious way. This is to say that the prices increase under their side. That is because AI is critical for the reasons that Brendan says. This policy puts a cost on AI using firms because they have to pay these premiums, right? And they have to pay that consistently, which means the price on consumers goes up, right? And if the price on consumers go up, how can a person with depression go on better health and get some help? They're not. They might get really sad and sad forever. That's because the price has gone up, and that is a fact. Under our side, the price is lower necessarily. The barrier to determining fault in court is not as difficult as government says. They think that we have to structurally prove that this is true. I'll structurally prove it is true, but I can just counter assert all your reasons can be said in the inverse. But what are the reasons for why the barrier is low? Firstly, record keeping exists. We have a camera model, and we also have road surveillance. They told us that there are cameras on the street. I didn't know that. I sped here. That means that it's obviously easy to prove something happened or didn't happen because you have lots of information. But also, AI has algorithms to determine what they were thinking. So you can actually get a special witness to come in to explain to the court what the AI was intending when it made its decision. But also, there's an incentive on firms to settle first. They do not want their program dragged through the mud. They would want to give money straight away if they are actually at fault. But additionally, social actors like government-linked organizations fund the cases against AI because there is afraid of it. The same guys who are funding things against, cases against airplanes from chemtrails, I mean, they're a bit crazy. Some of them are correct. You should fund cases against AI. They could be crazy. They could kill us all. So we think there is a capacity to launch these cases. They claim negligence is hard to prove. Firstly, duty of care is already established prima facie. If you're on the road, you have a duty of care to everyone on the road. Get your notes from a professor, not from Chegg. Secondly, there is an intent to breach always if you take risky behaviors, which you can establish with AI. Clearly, you can regulate them. You should regulate them. AI is awesome, but not no-fault AI.
I'll start by asking where payouts are more accessible, and then I'm going to talk about regulation. Firstly, on payouts, the note I'll make at the top of this is that for some very obvious reasons, this is probably the less important claim. The most obvious of those being that it is better to prevent someone from being permanently injured than it is to give them an amount of money to recompense that person on permanent injury. Many of the harms caused by fucked futures contracts, caused by AI chatbots telling you to do the wrong thing, caused by cars crashing, are irreparable and cause damage that extends far beyond the people who will ever receive payouts. Jerry says I should not be rude, so I'm going to provide a series of measured responses to their analysis on board. Their first claim is it's really, really difficult to prove negligence, and their analysis here is just to say the three elements of negligence and assert they're hard to prove. The first is duty of care. As Joe points out to sufficiency, there are established categories of duty of care between the maker of a product and the person who uses it, that's Donna Hewitt-Stevenson, and anyone that's on the road and anyone else who's on the road, that's Miller v. Miller. The second claim they make is you need to prove you have to breach the duty of care, and their assertion on the breach of duty of care is you have to prove they intended to breach the duty of care. That is not true. The response is that you must prove that the reasonable person would have taken steps to prevent that breach. The reasonable person taking steps is the company taking steps to make sure its AI vehicle does not crash or run a red light or kill people. It is a chatbot making sure that its chatbot interprets other people's language correctly. Those reasonable steps are observable. They're not difficult to prove because many other competitors will be doing it. Because there is a system of normal, human beings have done this, you just need to say that they should make the AI do what human beings already do. So it's very obvious to explain what their reasonable steps would be. The third claim they say is it caused the harm, and it's hard to prove that. This potentially, I think, is the one true claim they make, which is it's difficult to prove causation. But it is far easier to prove causation when we have an enormous amount of information. The reason causation is typically hard to prove in negligence is we have imperfect knowledge about what happened. So it's hard to prove on the balance of probabilities. I know these are civil cases, so the balance of probabilities is not beyond reasonable doubt. And it's hard to prove on the balance of probabilities that causation occurred when you have imperfect information. But we countermodel and also prove that there's likely to be an enormous amount of information about what happened on the road or what happened in the futures market or what was said in that conversation with the chatbot or the human so that we can prove causation. Their response to our material and information is twofold. First thing they say is this is corporate proprietary information. Actually, one thing. They say it's corporate proprietary information, and therefore you're unlikely to be able to countermodel it. 5 responses. Firstly, this is the status quo. You already have to disclose this information to, for example, the courts. You already have norms of you have to disclose corporate proprietary information. That happens when we sue Big Pharma. Secondly, you can just have it in camera. You can just have the court do that stuff and then redact it and then release it publicly. There is no reason that just because you disclose your data to the court that you cannot just show that publicly. Thirdly, for the reasons that they explain that their model does not require an enormous amount of fiat. Ours does not either because the political capital is against AI corporations in such a way that people probably don't support letting them hide the ways that they fuck shit up. Fourthly, this is symmetric because they say they need to give the information to the insurance company so the insurance company can access your premiums. So if the harm is just you're giving up the information, not who you're giving up to, that happens symmetrically under their side. Finally, I think we can just I think it's unlikely to be going to be a problem for the reason that it applies equally to every competitor, so the kind of harm they describe is unlikely to occur because every competitor does this. And saying no, we don't want to have this law applied to us because we plan to crash some cars into people seems like a pretty bad marketing strategy. But we explain that it's likely to be easy to prove for 3 other reasons to get no response. First is that algorithms are observable. You can work out why they made the decisions. You can, for example, look into why the AI said what it did, what training data was fed into that decision. That is useful. Secondly, companies have an enormous amount of incentives to settle, and their claim is that it's going to be disastrous to have really long legal cases that they fight out. The problem is companies don't want to fight out long legal cases because that reduces the extent to which people are willing to purchase their products. Companies obviously have an incentive to likely settle early on in the process and provide people with payouts. But fourthly, social groups in society, people like the ACLU or governments, have an enormous incentive to subsidize your court case, which means giving you money up front, giving you no win, no fee, etc. type deals. The reason that law firms and society groups want to do that is because they want to hold corporations accountable. And this is the way you can hold corporations accountable. There is no mechanism for them to provide funding to do that in a no-fault insurance scheme, because the same thing happens whether you provide funding either way or not. But on the outside, those organizations provide funding. So we prove you're likely to reach court case solutions pretty easily without a huge amount of effort. Why are you likely to access better remedies? And this is, I think, the first very concrete benefit we've proven today. There are two types of very good benefits we get here. First impact is we pay people out more, and Bennett asserts that that you don't have to pay out more in a fault system than a no-fault system. I think he should listen to his Prime Minister's speech, where they explain that the costs of payouts in court cases are very high. Who do you think the costs of payouts in court cases go to? They go to the victims. That is beneficial. But secondly, we explain there's a greater range of remedies. That is, you don't just have to do things like give them money. You can enforce things like specific performance. So if your AI chatbot reneges on a futures contract, you can force them to go through with that futures contract and prevent losses. You can do things like enforce the way that the company makes regulations into the future, which is very good. Their final last-ditch plan here is you have to pay more for R&D, and that seems like it's such shit. There are three reasons why you should care about victims far more. Firstly, principally, these victims have been hurt by a company. They are owed recompense. We on the side provides it to them in a greater amount and in better forms. Secondly, victims are far more vulnerable. The people that have benefited from R&D are the people who can afford to buy the AI earlier and afford to buy it to its maximum extent. We are the side that benefits people who might never have been able to afford to buy that AI because they were on the road and hit as a pedestrian. Finally, I just think this is more important just because, come on guys, it's real people, it's less speculative, right? Like they've been hurt, we give them money. You speculatively claim AI is good, don't really prove it, and then maybe it gets easier to do R&D on that good AI. Let's talk about the second argument. Where regulatory framework is better. Before I move on, Aaron. Okay.
Yeah, so your argument that AI gets more expensive because of high insurance premiums is A, washed out because their payouts are larger in our world, and B, risk premiums are predictable costs, so it's not necessarily a cost. Predictable costs are better than volatile costs, which is why.
Okay, so first problem is, so in response to A, you explain in your speech that the payouts are lower. So the tension of your own speech. In response to your claim on this drives up premiums, and that is, the drive up of premiums is a reason for companies to avoid regulation anyway. There are three problems to this. Firstly, your own analysis explains why companies are reluctant to provide insurance agencies with perfect information, so they're unlikely to be able to properly assess their claim. Secondly, the game theory of this is there's a collective action problem. That is, every company knows that they can afford to take the hit of a higher insurance premium because everyone else is doing it and everyone else is cutting corners. So you need some form of overarching regulation to do it. Thirdly, I just think this is unlikely to scale up in the same way. So it's not likely the case that you get massively higher insurance premiums relative to the massively higher court cases we described. It's likely far more important and far more impactful in shaping companies' incentives. Let's continue talking about regulatory framework. We improve the regulatory framework in two ways. Firstly, we create precedent, and they say precedent is bad because judges don't know shit. Firstly, this misunderstands precedent. The judges aren't describing exactly how to make policy. They give you guidelines about the kind of mistakes you can't make. Secondly, judges are pretty qualified. Thirdly, I think the precedent we make is likely to be directed by governments and directed by civil society in ways that are good. Secondly, we explain it decreases political capital for regulatory frameworks. And Bennett is like, oh, I don't understand this. What don't you understand? The claim is just, if people believe that whether or not AI is regulated, they will get a payout if an accident happens. They don't give a shit about regulating AI because they're like, well, it's fine, I'm gonna get money either way. But if people know that they will have to fight a court case, then they're far more likely to support political capital and regulate those AIs down. Why is it good to have regulation? They say that it's bad to slow down AI. Three problems. Firstly, they actually don't prove that AI is good beyond just referencing better help. There's no analysis of why you should really care about slowing it down. Many AIs do things like designing Israel's weapon targeting platform. I feel like slowing that down is pretty good. Secondly, it's a counterbalance because we explain people already don't like AI. People already have AI. AI already has an enormous amount of power in status quo. We are the side that counterbalances that. Thirdly, we prevent harms to the most vulnerable people today, which are the victims who get better payouts and who get more remedies. Clearly, or opposed.
What our extension will do is demonstrate why, even if you are able to get the slate of regulations that side opening opposition prescribes in this debate, the process of assessing fault when you involve artificial intelligence is dramatically costlier compared to the process in which you only have human input. That is despite, and in fact maybe because of the regulations that side opening opposition provides in this debate. And that will demonstrate two things. Number one, it will explain why this is a world in which only the largest companies, which are able to afford the costliest excess, are able to use artificial intelligence in their products, which leads to market consolidation. And it will demonstrate why we are able to insure more people and get the payout benefit that side opening government tries to claim in this debate. The first prong of this extension will be an explanation of why it is very difficult to assess fault, even when you get the slate of regulations that side opening opposition presents in this debate. The first thing that I want to point out in this first prong of my extension is that even if you have the most well-regulated market which logs every single thing an artificial intelligence does, that is still miles more information that an insurance company needs to sift through than if it is just human error. Let me give you an example. In the United States of America, where the vast majority of people that have healthcare have it through health insurance, a big reason why the United States healthcare market is so costly is literally because of the amount of paperwork people need to fill in. It's because doctors have to hire secretaries and nurses to fill out insurance paperwork. It's an incredibly tricky industry in that sense, and it is with human input. Think about what side opening opposition is talking about in this debate. Having to read every dial, look at every time the speed increased in the car, all of these different things that are now having to be logged, you have to now give to the insurance company, write down. That has a number of impacts, one of which extraneously I will talk about now is that it introduces a massive inefficiency into the market. Now every company has to have a logging division of their AI market, which is massive imposition on those companies. Which is important when we're talking about trying to break into the market, and I'll prove it's consolidated later on. No, thank you. But that just demonstrates the amount of paperwork you have to put in is quite large. Secondly, I would question actually whether or not this type of regulation is really achievable in this debate. Artificial intelligence is very famously a black box. You cannot know the way artificial intelligence operates internally. We don't know why ChatGPT thinks the word strawberry has 2 R's in it, for example. Which is why, maybe you're able to say, okay, well, at this point the artificial intelligence increased the speed of the car a little bit. You don't know why it increased the speed of the car, and maybe it did it for fairly reasonable reasons. So for example, maybe somebody is at an intersection, they turn right and they get T-boned, and that looks like, okay, they're at fault. But maybe if there are reasons and mitigating factors as to their thinking process, well, it was raining, somebody was coming up behind me and going to rear-end me, those are the sorts of things which you cannot adjudicate in this sort of regulation model outside opening opposition is talking about. No, thank you. So, thirdly though, there are so many moving parts with artificial intelligence compared to a single human person. Think about all the training data involved, all the different engineers, the company of the rideshare operator, the AI company that is giving you the contract. There are so many different moving parts. It's so easy to just scapegoat somebody if they are the actual person that is at fault, which is why AI introduces so much extra complexity. Fourthly though, which also responds to the other claim that so opening opposition makes about, well, we get more regulation and more auditing, is an analysis of incentives. Artificial intelligence companies actually like the fact that AI is a black box. They don't want their internal AI operation to be able to be seen and understood by other competitors on the market, no thank you, which is why they have every incentive to delay, to obstruct, to not comply with regulations. And we're talking about Elon Musk, who are involved in these types of companies, somebody who was so upset with Brazilian regulation that he pulls out Twitter of that market entirely. We're talking about weird tech bro people that think Sam Bankman-Fried is the Messiah. These are the types of people that don't believe in government. They are libertarian in nature, and I think there is every incentive to obstruct, and also just make claims well, this is anti-competitive, the government's going against antitrust law in X, Y, Z way or another. You can fiat that you are able to legislate, but you cannot fiat those legislations. People aren't going to try to obfuscate that as well. Let's get into impacting before then opening shop.
Big companies already keep this data, as I said, but saying it's hard to find legally relevant information is a ChatGPT generated claim. Maybe that was true in the past, but you can just use Control F.
So they don't actually keep this information right now, and the reason for that has to do with privacy. These companies really want people to sign on to their product, but the big concern people have is I'm putting private information into this chat box, it's observing me, which is why they throw out all of this data right now. So that claim does not work. So impact. Number one is far costlier to insure people, which means fewer people are able to access insurance because it is costlier. Fewer insurance companies or government-provided insurance options are less likely to want people to be able to sign up. And if they do, they require significantly higher premiums than under the alternative. Second thing I'll say though, as a second mechanism as to why things are costlier, is to say that in a world in which you have a fault model, that inherently favors companies that are able to pay more money and have more money in their coffers. And it is for the reason, a fault model, the way it realistically works is everyone pays a premium, and then if you're at fault, you pay in excess. that excess is quite dramatic. So for example, in the case of a car company or like NRMA comprehensive insurance, because I looked at the papers yesterday for no particular reason, is if you are at fault and you are say under 25, you have to pay like $3,000, whereas if you're not at fault, you pay $0. But that same like difference is true on a massive scale when we're talking about companies. Like it's insane. And it's really important in this instance because no fault, everyone pays a premium. So all the companies are subsidizing everyone else to get that insurance. Fault, the people that are subsidizing the people that are paying the excess, which has to be people that can pay the massive, extraordinary excess, which favors the big like Teslas of the world, OpenAIs of the world, Microsofts of the world, but does not let people break into this market, which I think empirically is very consolidated. But secondly, because there are so many companies that have first mover advantage, a lot of people have gotten a big market share, which is really bad for consumers. There's not many options, you don't have competition. We want a more competitive market there, and we don't get that under their world as well. Lastly, maybe also notably, we have to mandate it, because if there's like some no fault on the market, but only 2 people sign on to it, like there's no economies of scale to be able to have that be efficient. For those reasons, vote CG.
I'm fine with the speech being recorded, but we'll see. I'll redact those maybe. 3 contributions from closing opposition. I'm firstly going to explain why you need to be able to prove fault in order to get people the claims that they deserve, and why no-fault systems completely chill the possibility of any other course of redress. I'll secondly explain why a no-fault system needs investigation into the real causes of errors that are generated by AI by assigning liability to the deployers rather than the actual developers of those algorithms. And I'll thirdly explain why this hurts the competition in businesses that are rolling out AI. Let's firstly explain why you need to be able to prove fault. I would note that the regulatory framework that OO describes, as they also helpfully describe, is based on information that is already collected for other applications, are already discoverable in litigation, and are auditable by regulators. So let's explain why you need to be able to specifically use that information to prove fault. This is important because it's not just in a no-fault system that you automatically get to pay a no-fault premium or get a no-fault settlement in return. It's that you can't access other forms of redress for a few reasons. The first is when you have to pay no-fault insurance, and there are legal requirements that you have some sort of plan for if you incur enormous amounts of liability, which most large corporations have to do. They put it in people's contracting agreements with them to use that service, that those people waive their rights to seek other forms of redress besides the no-fault scheme. So they can't, go and start their independent proceedings because they've already signed on to some sort of insurance for what might happen to them if they use that product. And courts, when you're trying to argue about excess, about things that go outside of those bounds, are pretty ungenerous because they look at that and they look at that agreement and say, well, you signed onto that agreement that you would not pursue anything besides the no-fault settlement that has been given to you. Fucking tough, you're an adult, you got to enter that agreement. Second is people get pressured into accepting money, even if you don't believe that first mechanism, which should be enough already, people get pressured into accepting that money quickly. We're talking about people with low financial and legal literacy who do not know their rights otherwise, and the insurance adjuster from their corporation calls them, says, hey, we're so sorry about your accident, here is the money, and they go, great, there's the money. But with that comes an agreement to not pursue any further action against that company, and also usually something like an NDA, which is pretty fucked, and even though they're often legally unenforceable, people don't know that, so they basically are. Thirdly, is a lot of the time they get cajoled into accepting really low payouts because they know the insurance adjusters know that they're in a weak bargaining position because they cannot meaningfully access other forms of redress. So that often means that, for instance, if you get something misdiagnosed by an AI diagnostic software like a cancer, and you either have a bunch of tests that are unnecessary and injure you, or it misses a cancer like skin cancer or something like that, you get less money than is actually sufficient to cover your costs because that gets negotiated down by that insurance adjuster and you can't do anything else. So if you can regulate it in any other way, you should weigh this contribution very, very highly because no-fault systems absolutely suffocate the ability for people who've been seriously injured and seriously harmed to access any other form of redress. And we know at this point in the debate that it's already been proven that negligence, but in particular and uniquely from CEO, the way that courts frequently treat negligence from companies that deploy AI are very, very sympathetic. Like, sorry to be cringe and cite another case, but when someone wanted to access a bereavement policy by Air Canada and their chatbot gave them an answer that said that they could access that policy, even though on another part of the website it explicitly said that that was not within the airline's policy, a court awarded that person the benefit of that bereavement policy anyway, because they said that it was not on them to decipher the use of AI by that corporation and that they had to honour it and stand by. I note that a lot of time it's just a breach of contract, even if you're not including negligence, and that there are consumer law protections even if you don't have a great understanding of contract. Let's secondly explain why this hinders investigation into the real causes of AI. This system designs and assigns costs and responsibilities to businesses and not developers, which in itself license those operating like bots and stuff from those businesses, and the deployers that are the subject of this debate. When you brush everything aside and with no fault claims, we assign liability and for that cost to the wrong people, and we don't properly investigate why that model did the wrong thing. What happens when we have a fault system? One is when you don't have no fault insurance, people who want significant money do try to prove fault, like they take it to court in many instances, or they get a settlement that's very, very large, and that itself does two things. One, a lot of the time that litigation provides an enormous amount of information and precise information, as opposed to the fucking ocean of information that AI developers keep that is very difficult to sift through otherwise. It's better to just let lawyers do it. Second is where those settlements are large, rather than just the day-to-day cost of paying liability insurance, that actually is what prompts full investigations into what really went wrong, rather than just expecting that these things will happen and we'll deal with it in the long arc of our development, rather than dealing with it right now. Second is that when these companies have really big one-off costs, they take that up to the next level. They go and sue the developer who licensed them that artificial intelligence, who is probably at fault in this situation anyway. They apply pressure to the people who license it to them. That leads to more litigation into the actual causes of AI faults when those like algorithms go wrong, and that actually generates an enormous amount of political capital from large businesses that license AI models, which is basically all of them because they don't do it in-house. Formal regulation into AI is incredibly important. This info might be theoretically available, but it's better if someone wades through it first. What is the impact of this to the debate? One, it allows for the better regulation of AI because we properly know what junctures are problematic. Second, it allows other actors in the market to preemptively adjust their models so that they don't behave in this way. And thirdly, it allows us to set proper legal precedent rather than fumbling around the dark, which is what this bench condemns us to. Opening.
Yeah, even if less people get paid out an hour, somehow accelerating AI prevents the number of accidents in the future. At best, you provide partial reprieve. We prevent accidents from happening.
Well, you don't accelerate the development of AI, as I'm about to explain, because you in fact deeply hurt competition by forcing businesses that are doing the right thing and using AI to supplement human activity that they can control, using it in sensible ways to just blanket pay no-fault premiums that you concede on your bench are quite high. So let's explain that argument. There are a few premises. The first is that many companies are not being dicks about AI. They're using it in a way where it is supervised by human oversight that they can control, whose actions they can control. So that looks like, for instance, a doctor double-checking whether the AI has picked up the right thing. And now they can't, because all of those oversight mechanisms have costs, and now they have to double up on the cost of professional liability insurance, meaning they actually can't afford to do both of those things, but they are now mandated to do one, so they will drop the other. That helps their cost in the long term if mistakes happen and their premiums go up. Second, is there are actually lots of small actors that would potentially roll out these technologies. I'm talking about literal individual medical practices using medical diagnostic AI services who just can't afford to. They couldn't afford it, or if they are forced because the market has compelled them to, they will go out of business. It is unjustly spreading the cost to actors that were otherwise doing the right thing, which is overwhelmingly the critique of no-fault schemes. Third, new companies have far higher insurance premiums at the point that they enter the market because they have no proven track record of compliance or of safety or anything else, so insurers don't know that they can trust them, which means that there is a chilling effect for other entries into the market for the use of AI services, which means that all of the use cases of AI in medicine, in self-driving cars, in whatever, will remain in the monopolistic clutches of the companies that we all agree in this debate are pretty evil. Never been prouder to close opposition.
The 18th century French poet Voltaire once said that the Holy Roman Empire is neither holy nor Roman nor an empire. I wonder what he would have said about side closing opposition's novel, important extension. I'm going to first respond to side closing opposition in the way I understand it. I think they have two hard-hitting claims in this debate. The first one is to say insurance adjusters would decrease the amount of money that people who would otherwise be getting quite a large payout would get in a world in which we introduce mandatory no-fault insurance. The first thing I would say is that, to a certain extent, this claim doesn't really make much sense to me based on the way I understand insurance and how it works. This claim seems to make sense if individuals would be getting advice from an AI chatbot and then acting on that data. Maybe somebody gets, onto ChatGPT and it tells them, look, you're somebody who ought not get checked out because that lump in your breast is probably just, nothing and you don't have to go checked out. In those sorts of instances, these AI companies already have waived liability for that. So that person, unfortunately, on both sides of the debate, is probably not really going to be insured. What we're talking about here is companies already have a legal responsibility to pay something out if, say, you're in a rideshare car that crashes. And then the insurance company that they are with will then compensate that company for the payout that they have had to make to the person who is in the car. So insurance adjusters might screw over the company. They're probably not going to be screwing over the person that is on the receiving end of that company's products, which means that the impact of side closing opposition's argument, their human impact, is a lot lower than they would otherwise have you believe in this debate. And the second thing I would say then is, they then go on to talk about competition, and this is also obviously a very important impact in the debate. And we talk quite a bit about competition at side closing government. I'm going to give you some more impacting about our material on this claim later on in this speech. But I would point out that I think a lot of the analysis we get about competition coming out from closing opposition in this debate seems to be somewhat symmetric in this debate. So for example, let's take the mechanism which is premiums are negotiated between an insurance company and somebody who's entered the market. So if you're a small AI company or company that is employing AI in your services, you're going to be screwed over by this insurance company because you're new, they think you're riskier, and so they're going to increase your premiums. It seems like the incentives to do that would be roughly symmetric regardless of whether or not you have fault insurance or no fault insurance. A smaller company, unfortunately, is still going to be fucked over by an insurance company that says, hey, you're new, you don't have an existing, the equivalent of credit in an insurance context. And for that reason, the premiums would be negotiated in a roughly similar way. What side closing opposition would need to have given us in this debate is the reason why the specific model of no fault is what causes that. But I think it's fairly tenuous based on what I understand from the side closing opposition in the speech in this debate. But sure, go for it.
Yeah, the point is that all no-fault premiums are higher because you have to insulate against all future claims, whereas fault premiums are lower. So this makes it doubly expensive for smaller bodies to enter the market.
Yeah, so the way that a business deals with insurance is they have a risk management team, and what the risk management team does is they calculate the long-term amount of money that business is likely to be paying out to an insurance company. So they're going to say, look, in 20% of cases our cars crash and we have to pay this excess. So that company has already written down, in the long run, we're going to have to pay $200,000 to insurance companies when we calculate the premiums we're going to have to pay and the likely excesses we're going to have to pay. And that's the money they actually care about. So it's not just premiums we care about, it's premiums and the amount that they have to pay via excess. In a world in which you have no fault, there is no excess. So yes, potentially premiums are higher, but because there's no excess, because of how high that is, basically what it means is that some companies are going to be winners from that, and some companies are going to be losers. Companies that are going to be winners are probably the companies that didn't have as much money, didn't have much of a rainy day fund, couldn't afford to pay the excess, couldn't afford to pay the insurer, because they're able to now, go out and basically not have to pay that excess. Smaller companies that couldn't pop it under their world now have these other companies subsidizing their ability to gain insurance. So we give you an extension and why it is so important in this debate. So that is why I think, the problem with a lot of teams in this debate, which we correct for, is people understand what premiums are, because it's in the info slide, but we understand what excesses are, because we understand insurance. Now, let me talk now about side opening opposition. Opening opposition before, yeah, sure. Okay.
So you have the same problem as your open, which is that at best individuals get a bit more money after accidents, but the way to prevent accidents is more regulation that can be enforced through specific performance?
A few things. Number one, regulation is not necessarily mutually exclusive in this debate, and I would say we're moving naturally and organically, regardless of the resolution of this debate, towards a more tightly regulated AI market, because there's so many people that care about AI. Companies are starting up AI security divisions. I think you're going to get regulation regardless of whether you get it now because of a counter model or later down the line, which makes this fairly marginal. The second thing I would say is that actually we do care about insurance, because what insurance allows to happen is for more companies to start utilizing AI, which as an added impact means you have more competition. Competition means you are competing in some way, so you likely compete to give a more secure product, because businesses that take on your AI chatbot care about security, care about people trusting their business. So we gain competition, and that is an important impact. Opening opposition though, your core claim seems to be, the way I understand it, that assessing fault leads to things like auditing, regulation, precedent, and all of that is good. I think our extension deals with this fairly neatly, which is that we provide an analysis of incentives. And our analysis is people that are at the head of these artificial intelligence companies are the type of person who, based on their character, based on their profit motives and incentives, are the sort of person who are likely to obfuscate, lobby against, obstruct any attempt to get regulation, auditing, and precedent. The second thing which we talk about, which responds to this very neatly, is we explain that AI, as the way it functions, is a black box, that we don't necessarily understand the exact way that, say, an AI chatbot tokenizer makes a link between one word and another, or whether or not a driverless, what the safety calculus in a driverless car's thought process was, which means that you might have regulation. But it's basically just like, in campaign finance, to use an analogy, we've got very good logs of who donates to which political party, or more or less, depending on your jurisdiction. But that doesn't necessarily go anywhere, nobody cares. There's just more information, but it's not actionable. I think that is the problem with OO in this debate, and that is why they cannot win. Thank you.
Three extensions from closing opposition, all of them were lost today. Our first explanation is why we prove that a no-fault policy means that the average payout for victims is just significantly lower. Open opposition and open government get caught in a fight about how the law works and side a bunch of legal cases. This is very confusing for me as the average person. I'm sure it's very confusing for you. We fill this gap by explaining that even when payouts occur, and even when they happen more often, the quantity that you get from those payouts is just not enough to supplement the damage that has been done to you. What is the rebuttal we get to this? Closing government says, well, people get the same amount of money anyways because the transaction is from insurance companies to the company that wronged the person to the person. The issue with this is that the money that you get if you're wronged by a company does just come from the insurance company. So if we've explained that insurance companies are squeezing harder and not paying out as much, the person who's been wronged gets less money. That should defeat the rebuttal from closing government. The reason this analysis is important is because, first of all, it beats opening government. Opening government kind of stake their claim on the fact that payouts for victims are really good. But we've just identified why these payouts are actually really low. Because first of all, when dealing with when you were doing this kind of get back from insurance, you were dealing with insurance companies who are the best at reducing payouts. Like, it's literally their job. They have the specialists in the field, the best lawyers who can do it. So when you're talking to those people, they have every tool available to swindle you as much as possible. Second of all, the amount that you get from the payout is lower because you don't have any other avenues to pursue more money. Because the second you enter into a no-fault policy, you're just closed off from taking all other kinds of legal action. And third of all, as kindly identified by opening government, the power that you get from the payout is lower because you haven't proven a fault. When you prove a fault against a company, you get way more money against them because it's also a punitive measure as well as giving you a bunch of cash. The reason this is important is because it explains that when we are dealing with no-fault insurance payouts and people aren't lawyering up and aren't getting educated in the world in which they'd have to do when they're actually suing companies, they just get not enough money. Which means, first of all, they can't repair the broken bone that they get from when they're in a car accident. It means, second of all, they can't supplement the lost wages that they get if they've been given bad advice. Clearly, this is the most important claim in the debate. The reason it weighs over open opposition is because if you check on notes, all their claims are like, it's so good to get the money as quickly as possible, or it's so good or bad to get the money as quickly as possible, but there is no analysis on the volume of that money. And although the amount of money you get is the most important factor and not the speed at which you get that money, because you've got to repair all the faults that have occurred to you. That first extension then should run us the debate. Second extension is explaining why this worsens competition in the market of artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligence is used. We have two reasons for this. Our first is an explanation as to how this increases the cost for new entrants into AI markets. Because first of all, this artificially increases the cost for them entering the market because the premiums are higher, and this means that they can't compete. Our second observation is that this means the cost for bad providers actually goes down. Because when you spread the risk of insurance payouts against everyone in a market, it means everyone, especially people who are the worst, have to pay lower premiums. And yes, the premiums might go slightly higher if you're in a no-fault scheme if you do a bunch of bad things, but it'll go up way more if you weren't in a no-fault scheme, which explains why that harm is worse. The rebuttal we get to this from CG is explaining that the small companies who enter the market get fucked over symmetrically by insurance companies because they're new. But this is defeated in a point of information when we explain that all of the payments are now higher, so the amount of this harm goes up significantly. The reason you should care about that increase in the amount you've got to pay for insurance is because AI and companies that are starting to introduce AI have quite high startup costs because you've got to buy a language model, you've got to get a bunch of computers to run it, which means any increase in the startup costs reduce the amount of interest into the market. The second claim is saying that, well, this is actually really good for competition because it protects smaller companies that don't have enough cash in the bank to pay out when they mess up and kill someone. But first I'm going to note is this is a wildly unsympathetic actor. Like, I'm unclear why we need to protect this small startup company that has just killed someone with a self-driving car. And this means that we don't actually care about this analysis. We'd far rather protect the smaller companies that don't actually mess up and that don't actually get hit by this response. The impact of this extension is huge because first of all, the quality of artificial intelligence touches all aspects of people's lives, and the speed at which that is improved is a great input. Given that we've explained that there are now more actors in the market that can compete with each other, and the wrongdoings of the people who abuse artificial intelligence are exposed and punished unless they leave the market, the quality of artificial intelligence goes up. Why does this beat opening opposition? Their claim is that they magic in more regulation, and this increases the quality of AI. But this is worse than our analysis about businesses self-regulating and competing with each other to make a better product, because first of all, regulators are slower at what they do because they have less knowledge in the field. They are a government agency as opposed to a specialized business. Second of all, the best specialists in the field are working within the field and not for the government because there's a higher payout for them there, which explains that they're worse at detecting these flaws. Third of all, this is an impact that is mainly regressive because you can't ban someone from doing something until after that crime has occurred. Like, if no one knows you can mess with someone in a special AI way, you can't ban it preemptively. So it explains why the company regulating itself is way better. The result of this is, by explaining that companies themselves have better incentives, it is far less likely things go poorly. The reason this beats opening government is because they explain that maybe there's still a symmetric incentive for businesses to act well because maybe the insurance premium goes up. But first of all, as identified by them, the one-off payoffs are actually worse because these are more volatile payments and are harder to plan for, which means that businesses are going to be far more likely to try to avoid them, which explains why it is good to impose this punitive mechanism on them. But second of all, it explains why the premium that they have to pay, why the payout they have to do is just higher, which is the same. The amount of money goes up. At the end of that extension, we explain why the amount of firms using artificial intelligence increases and the responsibility of the firms using those artificial intelligence increases. That means that everyone who uses these products has a better life. You can scan for diseases more effectively. You can use fuel more efficiently. This is by far the highest impact in the debate. Before I move on to the final extension, opening.
Yeah, your competition mechanisms are missing a comparative. There are plenty of other startup cost factors that you identified that determine the startup cost overall. Insurance costs are the least important costs because they're most predictable, so you can factor in terms of risk management.
No. But so there are other costs, but I've just identified another cost which increases the barrier to entry, right? So I acknowledge there might be other reasons businesses don't enter the AI market, but I've identified another one which crowds out more, and more competition is better, so this means this next still stands. Final extension that wins us the debate is explaining that the legal investigation that happens under a fault-based policy is critical for the development of artificial intelligence. And we explain the responsibility right now of artificial intelligence and the models they roll out is often diffuse and hard to pin down, because is it the person that develops the artificial artificial intelligence, or if the business misused the intelligence in a really specific way. The reason this is important is because, first of all, we ensure that replications of incidents don't happen because we investigate the developers themselves, and second of all, we ensure misuse of artificial intelligence doesn't happen because we identify the direct source of the problem. Opening opposition are like, well, now courts can specify companies to do things, but this claim goes nowhere because they never explain what these things are. We actually identify the thing that the courts would compel them to do. But second of all, they never explain why this thing is so hard that you need a court to compel you to do it. We've identified the complexity of the interaction between the artificial intelligence company and the business, explaining why you need a court order to get them to investigate. As a result of these three extensions, we beat every other team on the basis of competition, on the basis of responsibility, on the basis of just winning and stuff.